Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We got a lot to get to on this episode. We're going to take a step back from the doom and gloom kind of conversations that we've been dealing with since the post-game show against UCLA and really going back to post-game against Oregon. We're going to look a little bit more big picture on what's going on here with Penn State in this matchup via a Northwestern reporter. We're going to have him join us from Chicago and spend a little bit of time breaking down what the Wildcats will bring to Beaver Stadium. They are 3-2 like Penn State. We'll talk about their path to this point, players to know, and we'll get a prediction from him as well and see how he sees things playing out for Northwestern on the road Saturday afternoon in Beaver Stadium. Of course, we'll be inside Beaver Stadium, very curious what the environment is going to be like for this team. There'll be recruits in Beaver Stadium, as there always are. We're going to get into that with Tyler Calvaruso in a bit. He'll give you some names to know about players coming to campus. And we've got a lot going on right now in terms of coverage at Lions247.com. Very active this week so far. We had Drew Aller, the quarterback of this team, on a phone call just a little while ago, on a Zoom call, I should say. Got a chance to pick his brain. Daniel Gallen asked a couple questions. I asked a couple questions. Bunch of coverage over there. Just on Tuesday, Zakee Wheatley, a key player for this defense, key leader for this defense, and Drew Shelton. Same goes for him in terms of leadership and a guy who's been counted on a lot, an offensive tackle. Had a lot of questions sent their way. On Tuesday, we got a lot of coverage over at Lions247.com. I'm going to be honest with you. I tweeted something about this early in the week. There's a sense right now coming off a loss like this and where the team is, some of this media group that we work with, and I have a lot of respect for so much of it, they're not necessarily showing up in the way that I thought they would this week. And I can tell you we're doing that at Lions247.com. And we got the coverage over there at Lions247.com. Quotes, notes, context, stories. And so I highly encourage you to check things out. Win or lose, no matter how tough this season may get, we will keep doing our job as diligent as possible, asking the questions, showing up to these calls, and we'll bring you what you need to see over at the website. And we'll also do that here on the podcast. Later today on Wednesday, we're going to get over to the practice field. We'll get a chance to see where this team's at from a physical standpoint, who may be missing, injury that we need to figure out. There was some shuffling on the offensive line last Saturday at UCLA. What does that look right now? Is that sustaining through another week? And then we'll have James Franklin again for a bit of a media interaction after practice per usual. So check out video content, interview content coming to Lions247.com on Wednesday evening. I mentioned we got Tyler Calvaruso coming on for recruiting. Let's get into that right now. Tyler, good to see you, buddy. Things have changed a bit since we last had you on. You were breaking down the whiteout recruiting reaction last week when we last spoke. There was a big weekend in between those two events, and obviously Penn State has dropped 2 in a row, stunning a lot of people across the country. We're going to talk about how that may be reverberating on the recruiting trail with you, but let's begin with the fact that Penn State's only offered uncommitted target in the 2027 class is no longer uncommitted. He's heading to the SEC. Discuss those dynamics for us, why it may have happened, and we'll talk about quarterback after that.
Yeah, 4-star passer Keegan Croucher from Cheshire Academy, Connecticut, is a New York kid. He is going to be calling SEC country home at the next level. He's not going to be hanging around the Northeast. He will be suiting up for Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss once he arrives to college. And it was a decision that I would say was set in motion far before everything transpired on the field for Penn State this week. And I know on the surface there, people are probably going to look at that and, put 2 and 2 together, but that this one was probably heading Ole Miss's way regardless. Croucher made it down there for a multi-day visit. During the same weekend, Penn State hosted its whiteout game, and Ole Miss really set the tone for that recruitment during that weekend. And Croucher was due back at Penn State for a visit in early November. He was supposed to attend the Indiana game. Initial read was he wasn't going to make a decision until he went through all of his fall visits, but made it down to Oxford, loved everything about Ole Miss. So he's off the board to the Rebels now. And the question is, where does that leave Penn State? Because Croucher was one of 2 quarterbacks in the 27 class who were uncommitted and held offers from the Nittany Lions. The other one is Elijah Haven, who is the nation's #1 quarterback. That was going to be an incredibly difficult pull for Penn State regardless of circumstance. I think really the hope for Penn State is you could kind of just hang around that top group, maybe make a move late. It seems like Haven does have a level of interest, but again, it's just going to be an incredibly difficult pull. I have a difficult time envisioning him leaving. an SEC. He's from Louisiana. Again, SEC country. I think there's a really strong draw there for him. So that's going to be a tough one for Penn State. And that is the only uncommitted QB offer in the 27 class that Nittany Lions have out right now. So where do things really stand? Ben Musser from Georgia, he was a Virginia Tech commit before Brent Pry was let go. And the Hokies are still searching for a head coach, and he's searching for a new landing spot at the next level. He doesn't have an offer from Penn State yet, but they've been keeping a really close eye on that junior season. They hosted him for the whiteout. It was a good visit. And an offer could come sooner rather than later in asking around. I think the evaluation process is still ongoing, but Penn State's been keeping a really close eye on Musser dating back to the early days of his commitment to Virginia Tech. So that's not a new endeavor for the Penn State staff. They've been keeping tabs on him. And now that they've got a visit under their belt, now they've got more junior season film to work through. We'll see where things go. Would not surprise me if an offer goes out. There are a few other guys who have come from conversation as well. Colin Boff from Ohio. He's another product of Brad Mandler, the quarterback's coach, who's worked with Drew Aller and Ethan Grunkemeyer. He's got a few P4 offers, was on campus for the whiteout. Penn State hasn't moved on him yet. That's another guy they're keeping an eye on. And I think the one thing that I want to highlight with this entire ordeal with 27 quarterback recruiting is, remember, there's that spring evaluation period looming. I think that's going to be an important marker for Penn State in its pursuit of a 27 quarterback, because Danny O'Brien, it's anticipated he'll be on the road watching guys throw. And remember, it's not too long ago. This is how Penn State came across Ethan Grunkemeyer. He was an April offer. He winds up in the class in May. We'll see if a similar kind of late riser, late quote unquote, pops onto the radar for Penn State. And if one of the Nittany Lions want to go on that, you also have to factor in as well. I know we're kind of talking a little bit into the future here, but maybe even the portal plays a role in Penn State's plans at quarterback when it comes to 2027 recruiting, when it's all said and done. So it's very much wait and see right now, because there's really just not a whole lot tangible in terms of targets, because it's very much evaluation mode for the Penn State staff right now.
We just got off a call with Drew Aller. We, as in Daniel and I know you were working on some recruiting stuff. And he says this team going into the matchup is playing for James Franklin. He acknowledged that James Franklin is dealing with a lot of criticism right now, and Drew is too, but we're to a different level right now, Tyler. And anytime that you've covered this team, certainly, and probably for me, going back to that 2020 season, a little bit of the 2021 when things were going awry, but by then he kind of had that contract extension. But there's a real conversation going on right now among Penn State people about whether or not, James Franklin is going to be the long-term leader for this team. And that's not a conversation I think any of us thought we'd be having come early October 2025. This was supposed to be a mission toward a national championship after, being one step short of that last year. So how is that kind of impacting the recruiting trail right now based on what you've heard? Because I think a lot of people look at the losses and that they do stink. Like, you don't want to lose to UCLA in the way they lost that. You don't want to lose that big matchup against Oregon. But this goes beyond recruits being turned off by back-to-back losses. This is about recruits and their parents maybe looking at Penn State's situation and saying, is the current leadership structure going to be in place for the next few years when it's going to matter most to us?
Yeah, and this is foreign territory for me in terms of my time on the Penn State beat. This is a conversation we've never had to have. It's something I've never had to ask recruits and parents about. When it comes to the 26 commits, those guys are fully supportive of the staff. The guys that I've gotten the chance to talk to, at least, they're fully supportive of the staff. They're still confident in this group and the way things are going, and they're confident that this group is going to be around for the long haul. So I haven't sensed any wavering from the 27s or the 26s, excuse me. If there is an overarching recruiting impact on everything that's taking place right now, it's probably the 27 class. Because again, you kind of you're not necessarily in limbo, but you kind of are in a way, just because there are conversations and narratives out there now that were not previously out there for public consumption. These kids are not immune to social media. They see the things that are being posted on Twitter, the things that are being posted on Instagram, the things that, some kids in some cases see things that are being posted on message boards. These kids, they're resourceful. They know what's going on. They understand the conversation that is taking place nationally among Penn State fans everywhere. They see it, they hear it, and you can bet there are programs. Look, we talk about negative recruiting, how sometimes it resonates with some kids, other times it doesn't. You can bet that's taking place as well, because it's an opportunity for other staffs to knock Penn State down a notch on the trail. It's a conversation that, again, it just couldn't be had until now. So I think if there's one thing I've learned about this Penn State staff, in my time on the beat. It's that they can do a good job kind of easing any of these concerns, that 27 recruits, and of course the 26s that they're trying to flip, and the 26s who are committed as well. I think they're charismatic enough and they have good enough relationships with their top targets to do that. But again, these kids are still seeing what's out there, and they might tell you all they want in the back of their, it's not in the back of their mind, but it's got to be lingering to some extent, because we're talking about your future here. Oftentimes you hear people say, oh, a prospect or a player should commit to the school and not a staff, but we're in reality here. Kids commit to coaches and situations all the time. And I'll also say this, I'm not foreign to uncertainty in a broad sense, because I covered Boston College when Steve Adazio was pretty clearly out the door. It was very evident towards the end that it was going to be time for BC to move on, and kids were still committing to BC. So I don't want Penn State fans to look at what's going on right now and think recruiting is going to come to a screeching halt. It's going to keep rolling on. I'm not sure that doesn't mean a commitment's coming down the pipeline or anything like that, but kids are going to continue to maintain interest in Penn State, everything the program has going on, this staff, because those are the guys they know and those are the guys they've had relationships with. So it's not going to come to a screeching halt. It's not dead for Penn State on the recruiting trail right now, but we're in an area that it's uncharted.
Yeah, and I'm curious on a couple of things here. I know you mentioned the 2027 class, and they're trying to really build something special there, but let's put that on the back burner for now, because these got 2026 recruits, and again, their families, whoever's helping them make these decisions, they're under the 2-month mark at this point from when they're supposed to finalize their plans. And 2 months from now, depending on how the next 7 Big Ten games go, what does this situation look like for Penn State? What does this situation look like for James Franklin? We clearly can't forecast that. We're not too good at forecasting because we all picked them to win by like 35 against UCLA. So I'm not going to try to project what things look like 7, 8, 9 weeks down the line here at Penn State. But how is this potentially cracking the door open for other programs to get in the ears of current Penn State commits? And does it present new hurdles in Penn State's ability to go flip guys who are committed to other schools right now?
Yeah, I think it does, because, again, it's a layer. When you're examining the potential for a flip, most guys like a little bit of certainty about the direction of the way things are going. And, Penn State, again, the conversation, the narratives are what they are. It's out there. They're aware of it. And it's something that Penn State is going to have to overcome in its effort to flip kids. Think about a kid like Carter Gooden, top 100 defensive lineman, who's been locked in with UCLA up until that coaching change. And he's going to leave that situation. He's got other suitors who might offer a little bit more potential stability. We still have to see how things are going to play out in State College, of course, but it's a hurdle that was not previously there. We'll say that. And it definitely opens the door for other schools to at the very least try. Again, from what I've gathered in speaking with some of the 26s who have been locked in with Penn State for a while, they're still, they're still very confident in the way things are heading in Happy Valley. But that's not going to stop schools from sending a text or making a phone call. Whether or not the recruit wants to answer that text or answer that phone call is ultimately up to them. But you see a result like the one that unfolded Saturday out in Los Angeles. Opposing coaches tend to take advantage of those kinds of things on the recruiting trail. They try to take advantage of those kinds of things on the recruiting trail. And you can bet that's happening. It hasn't raised any alarm bells in terms of guys looking around and seriously considering those overtures, but they're taking place.
I've worked in a college football recruiting department where the team on the field that season wasn't matching expectations that were pretty high, and you're dealing with that disappointment in the building. But you also, the message that was kind of hammered home to me back then, and I think you just naturally pick up on it, is you got to operate in a vacuum in the recruiting office. You cannot let the on-field stuff really impact the way you go about your business or let it impact much. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, how is this recruiting department moving forward right now, despite maybe some of the noise around this program?
I think they're maintaining consistency. What I mean by that is they're not changing who they are. There's no doubt everyone inside of Lash right now is immensely frustrated with the way that things have played out on the field recently. But there's no carryover. They're not letting that impact their performance on the recruiting trail. They're not going to switch up on kids and become these grumpy, frustrated coaches that, in conversations with prospects, because they're going to answer any questions that these kids have about the way things have been going on the field and the direction of the program moving forward in the manner that they've been answering questions prior to these recent struggles that Penn State has endured. So I think consistency is the biggest thing that I've picked up on. keep who you are in your relationship with these kids. And again, I mentioned the charisma of this staff earlier. I think that makes it a little bit easier for them, especially the behind the scenes guys, the guys who work on the recruiting staff exclusively. They're pretty good at weathering the storm. We've seen these guys weather storms with kids after a position coach leaves, and I think they're doing just that now. They're weathering the storm of these last 2 losses. Again, at the end of the day, we'll see what comes about in terms of tangible results, commitments, decommitments, where Penn State stands with kids in wake of everything that is taking place. But for right now, the approach, just stay consistent. Keep doing what you're doing. Because Penn State, at the end of the day, has appealed to these kids for an extended period of time for a multitude of reasons. And that's not going to go away. Now it's about reminding those kids of why they are so interested in playing for this staff.
Let's get on to this Saturday's game. I know we're not talking about the whiteout recruiting event, which was unbelievable with 200 plus prospects. We broke that down with you last week here on the podcast. But what are you piecing together so far about the recruiting guest list this Saturday, the potential significance of what might happen? And obviously, I'd imagine the staff itself is bracing for these recruits and their families to be present for the head coach being booed pretty loudly at different points. And if they don't have a strong start, then you start to wonder where the environment could go. But let's put that aside for now. What are we looking at for recruiting presence on Saturday?
Not anticipating that's going to be an eyebrow-raising kind of list. Early November, the Indiana game is probably your biggest remaining recruiting pitch, recruiting sell when it comes to game day visits. So this weekend's I think it's going to be toned down a little bit in terms of the quality of prospect making it to campus. That being said, that doesn't mean there are not talented kids visiting. Eli Ferguson, he's a wide receiver. He plays down at Brentwood Academy in Tennessee, but he's actually from the Northeast. Started his prep career at St. Francis in Baltimore. So he's a regional kid at heart. He's going to be back on campus. There's a potential composite 4-star running back, Abdul Toure from New Jersey. He plays at St. Peter's Prep in Jersey City. He's kind of crossing the T's, dotting the I's on making it to campus for this weekend's matchup. He has camped at Penn State. He has impressed the staff on the field. He doesn't have an offer yet. Maybe that changes if he makes it to campus. We'll see. But it's looking like he's going to be in State College on Saturday. Andrew Kern, he's an intriguing defensive lineman out of Philly. He plays for St. Joe's Prep, so he'll be on campus. And right now, that's really the Christian King, another one, 28 linebacker, New York product. He plays at St. Thomas More in Connecticut now after reclassifying. He's going to be on campus as well early. So that's kind of the early highlights of the expected group of visitors. We'll see what kind of gets tacked onto the list as the week goes on. But right now, don't expect a necessarily big recruiting week. It's not going to be an empty one, but it's not going to be a big one either.
All right. Well, Tyler, we appreciate it. I know it's not the best time to be covering recruiting, but I want to make sure people are aware you're still crushing it on the recruiting coverage over at Lions247.com. You're not going to slow down. I had mentioned We're not slowing down. We're full speed ahead. This is where you've got to really dig in and earn your stripes a little bit, doing what we do in reporting. And so you're doing on the recruiting end. We're doing on the team end. Appreciate the teamwork and love getting you on the podcast. We'll probably do it again next week, assuming we have some things to talk about on the trail. And look forward to your coverage coming out of the game on Saturday. One way or another, the feedback should be pretty interesting.
Yep. Thanks, man. Like I said yesterday on the board, recruiting's not going to stop, and we're not going to stop. That's just the way this thing goes.
All right. Good stuff, my friend. We'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks, man.
This episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast continues with focus on Penn State's next opponent. I know we have been hyper fixated on the Nittany Lions here in Happy Valley. We're going to continue to do that with our look at practice later on this Wednesday. And their next episode is going to be a lot about Penn State storylines entering game number 6 of the season. But we got to pay some respect to the opponent. Penn State certainly needs to do that this Saturday. And it's Northwestern coming to town. Like Penn State, they're at 3-2 on the season. These teams have met 21 times before. Penn State leads the series 16-5. They carry a 3-game win streak. You look back early in James Franklin's tenure here, lost at home to Northwestern in 2014 during his debut campaign. The next year lost on the road at Northwestern, but 3 consecutive wins in this series since then. You have to go back to 2023, the last time these two teams met. It was a win out in Illinois. And then in 2022, Northwestern visited here. Messy, rainy game, a 17-7 Nittany Lions win. So to help give us more perspective on this Northwestern squad, we bring in a Wildcats reporter from the Roundtable Network. He's the publisher for their Northwestern coverage. And we bring in Gavin Dorsey right now on the Lions 24/7 podcast. Gavin, good to see you. I know you're in the mix of covering Big Ten Media Days for basketball out there near Chicago. So thanks for taking some time to step away and focus on some football with us.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Happy to talk Wildcats as always.
Well, why don't we start with just the journey for Northwestern to this point? I think it's always important just to kind of catch up on where a team stands as they make the visit here to Beaver Stadium. So talk us through the 5 games that led to a 3-2 record, some of the highs, some of the lows, and ultimately what you've observed thus far.
I think most people would have expected a 3-2 record so far. Just looking at the schedule going into the season, Tulane, obviously an incredibly tough opponent, and Oregon, you guys had the chance to see Oregon firsthand and what they were able to do. It's a little bit been an up and down season in how Northwestern has gotten to that 3-2 record, especially with how the offense has struggled overall. I think if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have been very, very pessimistic about how the Northwestern offense has looked. If you asked me 1 week ago, I'd be like, okay, I can kind of see a little bit of the vision, but it's still pretty rough. And, now we're starting to see things click a little bit for Preston Stone, the SMU transfer quarterback, Zach Lujan now in his second year as offensive coordinator. I think the big thing really has been Preston Stone's lack of turnovers. He had those 4 interceptions and a fumble against Tulane. Since then, 7 touchdowns to 2 picks. You're really seeing what Northwestern is trying to do in the play action game. And even with the loss of Cam Porter out for the season with a leg injury, the emergence of Caleb Komolafe, a strong running game, has really, granted, the opponents have, aside from Oregon and Tulane, have not been exceptional, but you guys were able to see firsthand what UCLA did last week, and Northwestern definitely had one of its best performances against the Bruins. So definitely an up and down season so far in terms of trying to establish that identity, specifically on the offensive end. But it really seems like Northwestern is kind of coming into its own. I wouldn't say that Penn State is a massive litmus test, because I'm sure everybody and their mother thinks that Penn State is going to win, and probably by a large amount, but you never know. This is any given Saturday in college football. We've obviously seen what has happened the last couple of weeks, but this Northwestern team definitely trending in the right direction. But given how difficult the schedule is coming up, we'll see what happens. Really interested to see how the Wildcats embrace the challenge of a couple tough opponents coming up.
Gavin, I can tell you this, no one here in State College is taking any games for granted anymore after what went down in Pasadena last Saturday. I assure you of that. Just quickly looking at the wins and losses for Northwestern, they've lost to Tulane 23-3, Oregon 34-14. They've beaten Western Illinois 42-7, UCLA 17-14, and most recently last Saturday, Louisiana Monroe 42-7. You brought up Preston Stone, the quarterback. He actually was here in Beaver Stadium on a very cold Saturday last December. He lost his job as the starting quarterback for SMU last season, but he was still with the team despite acknowledging that he was going to be pursuing a transfer. He lands with Northwestern. Tell us a little bit about what he has brought to the table, how he's maybe potentially elevating their offense going into this matchup, and what it means to have a guy who's played a lot of football, a former top prospect, and now near the end of his career, to kind of have him leading the way, holding the rudder going into a road environment here in State College.
So I would say since the Clayton Thorson era, which he graduated in 2018, Northwestern's success has come and gone with the quarterback position. When they've had a steady hand under center that can, really push the secondary and push the linebackers back, this Northwestern team has found success. I mean, they went to the Big Ten championship game in 2020, won the Las Vegas Bowl in 2023, and they were hoping that what Preston Stone can do and the arm talent that he has, they'd be able to bring Northwestern to similar success here this season. Last year, what we saw a lot of was, Jack Lausch, very talented player, mostly with his legs, didn't have a ton of deep threat or, intermediate passing threat. And Preston Stone offers, or at least it was expected to offer a lot of that. So he comes in the winter and immediately wins over his teammates. He's a team captain. He's, somebody that everybody has just been glowing about. And I think when he first comes out for that Tulane game, everyone, including himself, including the coaching staff, including all of us writers, were just kind of shocked at the performance that we saw. And you kind of forget a little bit that he didn't really play last year as much. He was behind Kevin Jennings. He had broken his leg the year before, so it had been a while before he had gotten meaningful college football reps, despite, like you mentioned, this is a 5-year veteran and somebody who has played a lot of college football. So even though he has that experience, it had taken him a while to kind of settle back into his groove. And it seems like he's definitely found that. The main thing I think with him has been his confidence early on in the Tulane game. And then you could even see it a little bit into Western Illinois and then definitely into Oregon as well. Whenever he was less confident in the throws that he was making, kind of fading away, maybe off his back foot, those were the passes that tended to get intercepted or were inaccurate or things like that. But over the last few games, really since the bye week, his teammates have really rallied around him. There has never been a thought at all from the coaching staff about benching him, looking toward Ryan Bowe. And it seems like that has really manifested so far in what we've seen out of him. The main thing with him is how he attacks the intermediate level, I will say, because the past couple of years when Northwestern has struggled, they've really only had a quarterback that can do, dink and dunk it off, screen passes, anything under 10 yards. But he really likes to stretch that 10 to 20 yard range, especially with Griffin Wilde, who just seems to find an open spot in the defense any single time or anytime he's lining up in the slot, out wide, anything like that. That's definitely something that I am going to be looking for, especially as Northwestern's ground game is probably going to be heavily relied on for most of the rest of the season. How Preston Stone can dissect Penn State's defense and find those holes in the 10 to 20 yard range, I think is going to be the big key for him.
Yeah, you mentioned Griffin Wilde, 25 catches, 375 yards, a couple touchdowns, 15-yard average. No one else on Northwestern has even a dozen receptions. So clearly he is the go-to guy in this pass attack. Can you talk about the run game a bit? They've got a couple running backs over 200 yards, one right around 350. What do we need to know there? And maybe about the offensive line as being a part of that ground game.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the offensive line is, I believe per PFF, it's one of the best units in the country. I believe it's graded out as top 5 each of the past 3 weeks, but it might be even more than that, I think, over the whole season. Caleb Tiernan on the left tackle side definitely holds that down. He's going to be playing on Sundays next year. And then really what Northwestern did after getting wrecked in Big Ten play last year was they went out and they got experienced players in the transfer portal, which the Wildcats really haven't been able to do up until this past year because of different admissions issues and things like that. So they'd really only been able to use the spring transfer portal. Northwestern is on a quarter system rather than semesters. So class-wise, things just didn't work out like that. But they end up getting a 7th-year guard, Evan Berenson from South Dakota State, FCS national champion. They end up going out and getting Martez Lewis. He's starting at right tackle now. Well, he's kind of been moving in and out. Xavier Gray, all Conference USA caliber player at Liberty last year, hasn't even been able to get any reps because of how well this Northwestern offensive line is gelling. And then you have a redshirt freshman starting at left guard who has been exceptional so far, despite, really not having that much experience, and Jackson Carcello at center, guy who has been the Big Ten's highest graded center over the past 3 weeks, despite literally nobody having expected that this time last year that he would be getting those kinds of reps. So the cohesion of that group is a massive reason for Northwestern's success on the ground. They're currently 5th in the Big Ten in overall rushing offense, and that's without Cam Porter, who, 3-year captain, really expected to be the bell cow. But if there is a silver lining to Cam Porter getting hurt, which was incredibly unfortunate, he's obviously battled so much, it's the fact that we've been able to see so much more of Caleb Komolafe, who has really taken on a role of his own as a physical presence in the middle, while Joseph Hyman, goes around the outside. He does a lot of the outside zone rushes. I've been really impressed with what we've seen from Caleb Komolafe so far. They gave him, I believe, 27 carries a couple games ago. I can't remember if that was against UCLA. Yeah, it was 27 carries against UCLA. Absolutely ridiculous for somebody who I believe had 4 going into the year. And he just really has filled into that role exceptionally well. He's very, very adept at making his reads in space. And the fact that the offensive line has been so successful, it's just all coming together. And sorry, I know I'm going kind of long on this, but the last thing is that because of how well the offensive line is working and the run game is working, that's really taken a lot of pressure off of Preston Stone. You've seen him not struggle as much with the turnovers lately because the running game has been so successful.
Komolafe at 344 yards, about 4.5 yards per carry with 4 touchdowns. You mentioned Hyman, I'm sorry. How do you pronounce it?
Hyman, yes.
Hyman, yeah, he's over 200 yards, about 5.5 yards per carry. Both these guys can kind of complement each other, but it's been Komolafe getting the bulk of work at running back thus far. Switching over to the defensive side of the ball for Northwestern, what are the projected strengths and weaknesses as they hit the road and come to Happy Valley, and who are some of the potential, momentum swinging players that are within this defense?
So for strength-wise, I'm definitely going to say the defensive line. Anto Saka is the one that I'm always keeping an eye on.
Former Penn State target. We'll just put it out there. He was a guy that Penn State pursued and ended up at Northwestern. That was a big win for them on the recruiting trail.
Absolutely. He was really one of the last it was a 4-star prospect, really one of the last major wins that I can remember. I believe that was the end of the Pat Fitzgerald era. But he stuck with it at Northwestern. Really wasn't quite getting on the field early, but has just bided his time. Finally, this year, and I guess last year in rotation, you've been able to see what he's been able to do. Now, probably going to be a player that plays on Sundays, if not this upcoming draft cycle, then the next one. Definitely had a slow start in terms of statistical output, but he's making an impact on every single play on the pass rush. His pass rush win rate is incredibly high as well. Even if he's not quite getting home, he's opening up other opportunities for Northwestern's other defensive linemen, such as Aiden Hubbard and Michael Kilbane and Carmine Bastone. And really the strength of Northwestern's defense is just how deep that defensive line group is. It's definitely been a defense that has been bend, don't break so far. You look at the Oregon game, they allow 34 points, and I think that's kind of misleading because the defense played exceptional that game, except for one big run play coming out of the half. And really just the difference was that Northwestern's offense couldn't score and kept giving the ball back to Oregon. It was a 7-0, 10-0 game for a long period of time. And then just the wheels kind of fell off as Northwestern wasn't able to get anything. But the defensive line is definitely the unit that carries the water for this Northwestern defense. The area that's really thin and something that Penn State definitely can attack if there is, if they're able to find success, is the secondary. Northwestern has been missing its starting safety, Damon Walters, for the entire season. We've been hearing, he's week to week for the entire year, and he has not yet made his appearance. Josh Fussell has been great. But he missed the last game. He's a cornerback, really on the outside, started as a slot corner last year and, has really been asked to step up because of how thin Northwestern's secondary is. So that's definitely an area that I would look for Penn State to exploit, especially because I understand, obviously, how strong Penn State's run game is, Northwestern's defensive line, and, it's going to be tough in that regard, I will say. And so I would definitely look for the Nittany Lions wideouts to try and find some matchups that they can exploit in the secondary.
9 sacks on the season for Northwestern's defense. If I'm reading it correctly, only a couple takeaways through 5 games for the Northwestern defense, a couple interceptions. Special teams, is there anything we need to know there? And obviously, that can kind of make or break you on the road in a game like this. And generally, X factors across the field, where do you land there?
So special teams is interesting because I know Joseph Hyman has been one of the players that we've been looking at to get more targets, touches the entire year. Really a dynamic speed threat, and they've used him in the return game. Last week against Louisiana Monroe, they actually kept pooch kicking it so they wouldn't have to get it to him. But he's had a couple big returns, and that's definitely something that I would be looking out for. The kicking game is interesting because we saw Luke Akers start the year at kicker kicker and punter. He was doing double duty, and now mostly he shifted more into the punting role with Jack Olson. We've definitely, I will say Northwestern feels confident about its special teams, its kicking and punting, but also it's really David Braun and Zach Lujan have really embraced the analytics side of it and going forward on fourth down, being aggressive, especially in a league as tough as the Big Ten and the caliber of opponents that Northwestern has to play. So it's been very minimal in terms of, giving the opportunities up for, punting and kicking and things like that. I definitely expect Northwestern to be aggressive. Sorry, what was the other thing you said as far as X factors?
Yeah, I want to know. People might have heard Akers and been like, "Is he related to?" Yes, that is the son of former Philadelphia Eagles kicker, if I can say it, David Akers, longtime Eagle. His son now a specialist at Northwestern. Generally, any X factors you want to throw out there, maybe call your shot on something for Saturday.
So I can't even really say Griffin Wilde's an X factor because he's probably the best player. He is the best player on the offense. I will say that. But the interesting battle to follow has been who is going to step up as Northwestern's number 2 and number 3 wide receivers. We thought initially it was going to be Frank Covey and Ricky Amarazzi. A lot of drop problems so far to start the year. So really Northwestern's just been cycling guys in, trying to figure out what works. And it seems like they found something in Hayden Allegon, true sophomore, and a really, really good jump ball threat. He had 3 big ones that he hauled in for 80 yards just in the first half last week. Exceptional ball tracking skills in the air. He's somebody that I'm really expecting to take a leap as the season moves forward, especially as we saw Louisiana Monroe tended to double Griffin Wilde and make him unavailable. Who steps up as Northwestern's second, third wide receiver, whether it's Allegon or Drew Wagner, that is probably the biggest key to whether the offense is able to find success. And so I would say Hayden Allegon's probably my X factor, just because he doesn't have a ton of experience, but everything that we've been hearing out of practice, out of game preparation, they love this guy. They're saying he has earned his way into more reps, and he's certainly showing out on game day in terms of that. On defense, I'm going to say Fred Davis II comes over as a highly touted recruit, originally a 4-star to Clemson, has bounced around a couple spots. Northwestern got him out of Jacksonville State. And I believe he's I think he's second in the Big Ten so far in deflections. He's typically matched up against opposing teams' best receivers, very good at being physical and going up and making a play on the ball, especially in a Northwestern secondary that's decimated. I'm looking at him to really have a big game, especially in limiting Drew Aller in the Penn State passing attack.
Good perspective there on the X factors. Appreciate that, Gavin. Let's finish here. When you look ahead to Saturday's matchup, 3:30 kickoff here in Beaver Stadium at Penn State. As last I looked, the 22-point favorite for this matchup. Where do you land on a score prediction, and why do you land on that score prediction?
So I understand that a lot of the sentiment right now around Penn State is pretty negative, and I obviously when you lose to a UCLA team that's 0-4, back-to-back losses, it's just not the standard for Penn State right now. And I understand that the vibes around this program are seemingly not great. However, I'm 5-0 on my Northwestern predictions so far this year. And as much as I would love to pick the Wildcats, I just think this is a game that Penn State is probably going to come out angry. They're going to run the ball over and over. And even if Northwestern's defensive line is able to stuff them initially, it might be a long day for the Wildcats. So my prediction, I'm going to go with 31-10 in favor of Penn State. I just think this is an incredibly talented team. And even though this is a Northwestern roster that is finding its groove seemingly, I mean, this is a hostile environment against I will say a top 10 talented team. I know that maybe those results haven't shown over the last 2 weeks, but still definitely a team that I think is capable of making some noise over the back half of the season. And, I do feel a little bit more optimistic about Northwestern's season, the upcoming season, than I did a few weeks ago. But I think that I don't think that starts this week. So I'm going to go 31-10 Penn State.
We appreciate your pick. We appreciate all the perspective and insight you provided on Northwestern. And we're all curious if that hostile environment is going to be more hostile towards the Wildcats or the Nittany Lions as this game develops. It could go either way. He is Gavin Dorsey. He is the publisher of Northwestern coverage and the Roundtable Network. Gavin, enjoy the rest of your week of coverage. Enjoy the Big Ten Media Days for basketball. And thanks for making some time for us.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me on.
All right. Take care. That's going to do it for this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. Big thanks to Gavin. Big thanks to Tyler Calvaruso for hopping on and talking some recruiting. We turn our attention back to Penn State's football program with our next episode. We'll be fresh out of the practice field. We'll have a chance to put together our notebooks on offense and defense, our photo gallery, our video highlights, commentary from James Franklin. We'll get a few players after practice too. We will help you put your finger on the pulse of where this Penn State football team is right now over at Lions247.com. And we'll huddle up, gather for a podcast on Thursday. Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen, and myself will get together. We'll give you our score predictions, our players to watch, and our key storylines for Penn State as they try to snap their first losing streak in 46 games. Stay with us at Lions247.com. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening or watching to the Lions 24/7 podcast.